Welcome to the silent horror, where the whispers of the unknown come to life. If you're ready to dive into the chilling and unexplained, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our journey into the darkness. Prepare yourself. This is a story that will linger in your mind long after the silence falls. I used to love the silence of late nights. The hum of my old radio used to calm me. Until the night I heard my brother's voice through the static. The same brother we buried 3 years ago. Now, every time the dial turns to static, someone else I've lost speaks to me. They call my name. They know things no one should know. And they keep whispering the same message. Don't trust the living. The radio sat like a sleeping relic on her windowsill, its cracked wooden frame and faded knobs casting long shadows in the glow of her desk lamp. Maya hadn't meant to bring it to college. It had been her grandfather's, tucked away in the attic of her childhood home. But when her mom insisted she take something of his after the funeral, she grabbed the dusty thing more out of obligation than sentiment. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now it sat in her dorm, watching her with its silent speaker, like it was waiting for something. Maya glanced at the time. 2:07 a.m. sleep had been elusive lately. The stress of midterms, a roommate constantly partying, and that ever-present ache of loss that still hadn't faded. Her grandfather had raised her more than her parents had. He was the one who taught her how to ride a bike, how to tune a guitar, how to lie on your back in the grass and spot constellations. And he was the only one who ever truly listened. And now he was gone. Out of boredom or loneliness, or both. She turned toward the old radio and fiddled with the knobs. A whisper of static filled the air, comforting in a strange, nostalgic way. The crackle and hiss transported her to the night she and her grandfather would sit on the porch, tuning into distant AM stations just to see how far the signal would reach. "Come on, give me something weird," she muttered. Music from the 60s filtered in. Dusty, melancholic saxophones have faded into indistinct foreign news. Then silence. Then a preacher screaming about hellfire. More static. She almost gave up. Then the dial landed somewhere between two stations, 103.1, though there was no marker for it, and the air grew colder. The static changed. It wasn't just white noise anymore. It was layered, rhythmic, like breathing. Her fingers froze on the knob. Then a voice broke through. "Maya." Her blood ran cold. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't a DJ. It wasn't anything she could explain. "Can you hear me?" A man's voice, soft, familiar, like it was being whispered directly into her ear. She stumbled backward from the radio, heart hammering against her ribs. "Maya, don't be afraid. It's me." She shook her head, half laughing, half panicking. No, this is impossible. "It's Liam." Her stomach dropped, every muscle in her body locked. Liam was her brother, dead 3 years now. A car crash. She'd never forget the call. The voice continued, layered under the static, like a dream slipping through fog. "I've been trying to reach you. You're the only one who still listens." She stared at the radio. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink. "Liam," she whispered. "Yes. How is this happening?" There was a pause, and the static warped again, like it was bending around his voice. "Grandpa found the frequency. He warned me not to use it, but I had to try. I had to say goodbye. But now there's not much time." The light in her dorm flickered. A chill slithered across the room. "You have to stop listening, Maya. It's not just me here anymore." She reached for the dial, but her fingers trembled. The radio groaned beneath her touch. "They hear me when I talk to you." Her breath came in shallow bursts. Who hears you?" The voice faltered, grew distant. During the static, hollow voices, hungry. "I made a mistake." The words broke apart like shattered glass, swallowed by a rising chorus of whispers. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Male, female, children. Ancient tones that weren't even language, just feeling. Grief, rage, hunger. The room dimmed as if something were leeching the power straight from the walls. Her laptop screen fizzled to black. Her phone buzzed violently and went dead. And the radio, it screamed. A high, piercing shriek, like 1,000 fingernails dragging across glass. Maya yanked the power cord, but the radio kept going, panicking. She grabbed the whole thing and shoved it into her closet, slamming the door shut. Silence. No static. No voice. No Liam. Maya collapsed to the floor, her knees weak and her hands numb. What the hell had just happened? For minutes, or maybe hours, she didn't move. Her mind replayed the voice, the words, the warning. You're the only one who still listens. A loud knock jolted her out of her daze. Hey! Her roommate Nikki's voice came through the door. You okay? I heard, like screaming. Maya opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't form words. Her throat was dry. Her heart still beat like a war drum. Another pause. Maya, I'm fine, she lied, her voice hoarse. It was just a nightmare. There was no way she could explain what had just happened, because part of her still didn't believe it. Not entirely. And yet, when she dared to open the closet later that morning, the radio sat quietly on the shelf, completely unplugged, dusty, ordinary, except for one thing. The dial, once broken and stiff, was now perfectly aligned to 103.1. Maya had hardly slept the night before. Her dreams were restless, twisted with shadows and the sound of that haunting static. She kept seeing flashes of her brother's face, distorted and blurred in the white noise, his voice echoing in her mind, even when she woke. When the sun rose, pale and gray through the dorm window, she felt both exhausted and hollow. As she sat up in bed, the weight of the radio's presence in the closet gnawed at her. It wasn't just an object now. It had become something she feared and yearned for, all at once. Her fingers twitched when she thought of it, but she knew she had to confront what happened. She couldn't ignore it. And deep down, a twisted part of her wanted to hear it again. Liam. She tried to push the thought away, but couldn't. The last time she'd heard his voice, his real voice, had been the night before he died. He'd called her to say goodbye. It hadn't seemed significant then. Just one last conversation, one last laugh. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that night, when he was gone, the last words he'd spoken had haunted her. I'll always be here, Maya. She had brushed it off, the way you do when you're young and unaware of how precious time is. If only she knew. Sighing, Maya got out of bed and grabbed her phone. The screen lit up with missed texts from her mom, asking how she was, reminding her to eat, check in. She hadn't told anyone about last night. She couldn't. How could she explain something like that? The radio. She couldn't stop thinking about it. After a quick breakfast, Maya walked to her desk, steeling herself. She opened the closet and grabbed the radio, the cool wood pressing into her palms. It was heavier than she remembered, as though it had absorbed something from the night before. The faintest hum still lingered around it, like a forgotten echo. Hesitant, she set it on her desk and plugged it back in. It was just a glitch, she told herself. Just some interference. Nothing more. But the back of her neck prickled with unease as she turned the dial. Her hands shook as she twisted it, the noise swarming to life. First, there was only static, a murmur that sounded far away, like distant thunder rolling over an empty field. Then the voice returned, softer this time. Familiar. Maya. She froze. Her heart lurched in her chest. The voice was his, Liam's voice. There was no mistaking it. Her throat closed as she listened, barely daring to breathe. Maya, I told you I'd always be here. Liam? Her voice cracked, her hands trembling. Liam, is that really you? There was a pause, a strange, unsettling silence. The static buzzed louder, then, almost reluctantly, his voice came back through. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I just didn't know how else to reach you. Her stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to run, to throw the damn radio out the window, but the voice, his voice, kept her tethered. Liam, you're dead, she whispered. She felt like she was speaking to a memory, a ghost, a shadow. It was all too much. I watched you die. You died in the accident. I know, he said quietly, almost as if he were ashamed. But I'm still here. I never left. Not really. A shiver ran through her. The things he was saying made no sense, and yet they felt so real, so true. Then why? Maya struggled to put her thoughts into words. Why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you talk to me before? I couldn't. I wasn't supposed to. But there are things I need to tell you. Things only I can explain. The static seemed to thicken as he spoke, as if the radio itself was trying to hold him back. Maya swallowed hard. What do you mean? Explain what? Remember the last time we were together? The night of the accident. We were talking about going to the movies. You didn't want to go. You said you were tired. I was upset. Maya's throat tightened. Of course, she remembered. She had insisted on staying home because she didn't feel like it. She thought it was just an ordinary evening, just another stupid argument about plans that didn't matter. But you didn't know that something was watching us. Something we couldn't see. Something that was waiting. Her heart skipped. What are you talking about, Liam? What do you mean? The accident wasn't an accident, Maya, he said, his voice low, strained. It was them. They made it happen. They wanted it to happen. Maya recoiled, the weight of his words settling in her bones. Who made it happen? But the radio was only static now, a howling void where his voice had been. Her pulse pounded in her ears as an eerie silence hung in the air. She gripped the radio tighter, willing it to speak again. Nothing. Maya slumped back in her chair, breathing hard. Her thoughts spun, trying to piece together what she'd just heard. Something was watching us. They made it happen? It was insane. But Liam had said it. She had heard it. And no one else could have known what she and Liam had talked about that night. It was like he had been there with her all along. Then a whisper, a soft and familiar one, came again, faint but clear, as if it was right in her ear. Don't trust the static. Maya blinked, her heart skipping a beat. The words felt like a warning, like something more than a brother's love trying to reach out. She looked at the radio, then quickly unplugged it. The room felt heavy, as though the walls were closing in. But she didn't feel alone anymore. She was never alone. The voices had started. And now, it was only a matter of time before they came for her, too. The radio sat on Maya's desk like a silent symbol. It was just a thing, an old machine, or so she told herself. But since the night she had heard Liam's voice, nothing about the radio or her life felt ordinary anymore. Every evening, after the chaos of her college life settled into a dull thrum, she would find herself sitting at her desk, staring at the radio. The urge to hear Liam again gnawed at her, to hear that voice that promised something more, something beyond. She needed to understand. She needed to know what he had meant. Who was behind the accident? What did he mean by they had made it happen every night? She turned the dial, hoping to find him again. But the voices that emerged from the static weren't always familiar. They weren't always him. It was 11:47 p.m. when Maya sat at her desk again, the radio plugged in and waiting. She could feel the air grow heavy, thick with anticipation, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Her fingers danced nervously over the dial, flipping it back and forth. Static, just static. Her eyes flitted to the window. The night was quiet, too quiet. Her roommate, Nikki, was gone again, out at a party. No one was around to interrupt her obsession. No one to remind her that she was wasting her time, that she needed to move on. Maya's hand shook as she turned the dial again. And then there it was, the faintest crackle, the soft hiss of something trying to break through. Maya, her heart stopped. It was him again. Liam. She leaned in, breathless, as the static deepened, the air around her growing colder. She could almost feel him there, just beyond her reach, like a whisper in the dark. Maya, it's not right. His voice was faint, but still unmistakable. She pressed her ear closer to the speaker, her palms damp against the wood. Don't leave, please. She had to hear him, had to understand. Liam, what's wrong? Her voice cracked, but instead of the answer she expected, the static grew more pronounced, louder, until it was all she could hear. A sharp electronic hum, followed by the unmistakable sound of a scream, distorted, garbled. Then a low voice, not Liam's, rasped through the noise. It's too late. Maya recoiled, eyes wide with terror. The voice, who was that? It wasn't her brother, but it sounded wrong, like it wasn't meant for her ears. The whispering grew louder, overwhelming, as more voices joined in, many voices. Some were broken, fragmented. Others were clear and familiar, but they didn't all belong to the dead. Some were strangers. Some were alive. Maya, help us. Maya, you have to listen. Please, don't leave me. The voices overlapped, calling to her, demanding her attention. Her fingers shook as she turned the dial violently, desperate to stop the onslaught. But the static only became more violent. Each voice seemed to push harder into her mind. Liam, she cried out, her voice nearly lost in the roar of static. What's happening? But there was no response. The radio continued to scream, and the room seemed to close in on her. The shadows twisted, distorting into shapes, figures that almost seemed to move. Her chest tightened as though the walls were pressing in, suffocating her with every second. The voices turned darker, harsher, filled with malice. You shouldn't have listened. Now you're one of us. The air in her room grew ice cold. The lamp on her desk flickered, dimming as the whispering became more intense. A deep growl rumbled from the radio, sending a chill down her spine. She wasn't sure where the voices were coming from anymore. The static? The walls? It was all a blur. The room seemed to stretch and warp, like the fabric of reality itself was unraveling around her. Help us. Maya stood up quickly, heart pounding. She backed away from the radio, but the voices, so many voices, clung to her. Her head throbbed as if something were crawling beneath her skin, scratching to get out. She had to get away. But where could she go? The sound followed her, a shrill symphony of lost souls, of people who didn't belong to the living anymore, yet refused to be silenced. Their whispers filled her mind, gnawing at her sanity. With a frantic motion, she ripped the plug from the wall. The voices stopped. The static ceased. Silence. Maya stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The radio sat there, silent now, its cold wooden frame looking innocent, even empty. But Maya knew better. She knew what it was capable of now. She tried to steady her hands, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. It had been like the radio was alive, pulling her into a world where the boundaries between the living and the dead were no longer clear. And there was something else, something buried beneath the voices, something she couldn't quite grasp. Her phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. She looked down to see a text from Nikki. "Hey, when you get back, we need to talk. Something's been weird with the radio. I've been hearing stuff too." Maya's fingers froze over her phone. She blinked, tried to make sense of the message. Nikki had heard it too? Before she could respond, the phone buzzed again. Another text from Nikki. "Can you hear them too?" Maya's heart stopped. The voices were real. She hadn't imagined it. And now, somehow, they were reaching beyond the radio, reaching into the world. The air felt colder now, and Maya's mind reeled. She had to know. She had to understand what was happening before it consumed her, before it took everyone. The radio sat in the corner, silent and seemingly harmless now. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for her to listen, to uncover something she wasn't ready to understand. She couldn't stop thinking about the night before, the voices that had reached through the static. Some familiar, some terrifyingly distorted, but all of them were alive, and pulling at something deep inside her, something ancient and hungry. Maya couldn't let it go. She needed to know more. She needed to understand how this had started, what her grandfather had known, and why he'd left her with the radio. The one thing she could never throw away, even though it terrified her. Sitting at her desk, she reached for the worn leather journal she'd found tucked beneath the old radio the night before. The thick, yellowed pages seemed almost as ancient as the machine itself. Her grandfather's handwriting was messy, scrawled hastily as though he hadn't the time to care about neatness. There was a particular urgency in his words that sent a shiver through Maya's spine. She opened the journal, fingers trembling as she flipped to the pages filled with strange symbols and cryptic notes. Words like frequency threshold, and the static jumped out at her, almost as if they were calling to her. She read the first entry. "I found the signal last night. It's like nothing I've ever encountered. It calls to something deep within me. The hum, it's a pulse of rhythm, but it's not like any music I know. The voices are faint, at first just static, but then they speak. They say things they shouldn't know." Maya's stomach turned. She'd heard the voice of her brother, Liam, and those other voices, distorted, broken. She knew it. Her grandfather had known. Too. The next page was more troubling. "They say there's a door hidden in the static, a threshold between this world and another. I thought I could control it. I thought it was just a signal. But the more I listen, the more I understand. I can't. They are watching, and they want something from me. I feel them pulling at my mind. They whisper, just like the radio. They're all in the static now." Maya's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was reading. The voices, the pull she'd felt when she'd listened to radio. It was all in the journal, too. It was happening to him as well. Her grandfather had been caught in the same trap, obsessed with the signal, just like her. Her eyes scanned the page for more, desperate for answers. "I tried to warn Liam. He didn't understand, but he was always too curious, always reaching for things that weren't meant for us. I think he's already crossed over. If you find this, don't listen to the voices. Don't ever let them in. They will take you. They will take all of you. The dead are nothing compared to what waits in the static." The words blurred as Maya's hands shook. Liam, he had been trying to warn her, too. The warning her grandfather left behind echoed in her mind. The voices weren't just ghosts. They weren't just dead people trying to reach her. They were something else, something more sinister. She flipped to the next page, her fingers cold as she read on. "The more I listen, the more they call me. They want me to come closer. They want to show me what lies beyond the threshold. But if I listen for too long, I know what will happen. It happened to the others. I've seen it. The voices, they become stronger. The dead lose themselves, becoming part of something else. A collective, an entity that exists in the spaces between. I will burn this journal when I am done writing, but I must leave one last note. The frequency is the key. The door is real. The room seemed to close in around her as Maya read the final line. The frequency is the key. Her heartbeat quickened. The frequency, 103.1. The same station she had tuned into that night. The same one that had brought her brother's voice back to life. The same one that had started this nightmare. Her grandfather had known. He had tried to warn her, but she hadn't listened. He had thought he could control it. The static, the voices, but it was too late. They had already taken him. She slammed the journal shut, her hand shaking violently as her mind raced. The door, the threshold, what was beyond it? Her grandfather had gone too far, and now, it seemed, it was her turn. There was a cold feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had to know. She had to understand. She couldn't stop now. It was as if the radio had already claimed her, pulling her deeper into its grip. She couldn't let go. Not now. Her gaze drifted to the window. The darkening sky outside seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural energy. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. She grabbed it, desperate for some form of normalcy, but the text on the screen made her blood run cold. Nikki, Maya, something's wrong. I think I'm hearing it again. The message cut off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up without a second thought. Maya grabbed her keys and rushed out the door. The air outside was thick, heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes before a storm. She had to get to Nikki, had to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. The further Maya walked, the more the shadows seemed to stretch, dark and unnatural. The world felt off, like something was shifting just beneath the surface. The closer she got to Nikki's dorm, the more she could hear it. The static, the faintest hum, just out of reach. It was there, like a sound carried on the wind. And then, in the distance, she heard it. A voice. It was Liam's voice. Maya, they're here. Maya's footsteps echoed down the empty campus hallway. Each step a reminder that she was walking deeper into something she couldn't control. The air felt wrong, thick, like something was waiting just out of sight. She glanced around nervously. The silence around her too heavy, too unnatural. The soft rustling of her jacket was louder than it should have been. The campus was supposed to be empty this time of night. Yet something about this particular silence felt wrong. The radio in her bag buzzed with static, an undercurrent that had become a constant companion. It hummed in her ears, a relentless, cold presence that made her skin prickle. She was hearing things in the static now, whispers, broken words, voices she didn't recognize but felt deeply connected to. The more she heard, the harder it became to focus on anything else. Maya's heart raced as she turned the corner toward Nikki's dorm. The door to the building was slightly ajar, as if waiting for her to step inside. She felt an almost magnetic pull as she walked toward it. The whispers growing louder, more urgent. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, already dreading what it might say. The screen displayed only a jumbled mess of garbled symbols. The text distorted as if the phone itself was being infected by the same static that had taken root in her mind. Maya, the message began, but it cut off mid-sentence. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. Was this Nikki reaching out? Or something, someone else? Without thinking, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air in the building was stifling, heavy with the same oppressive silence she had felt outside. The lights overhead flickered, casting long shadows along the narrow hallway. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she couldn't, not when Nikki needed her, not when the static was getting louder. She hurried down the corridor, feeling the walls close in around her. Her footsteps seemed too loud now, as though they were being magnified by the walls themselves. Her pulse thudded in her ears, matching the rhythm of the unsettling hum that was building all around her. Maya, the voice came from behind her. She spun around, her heart nearly leaping from her chest, but there was no one there. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, empty, silent, save for the faint static that seemed to pulse through the very walls. The voice she had heard, Liam's voice, was gone. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep moving. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be. Nikki was supposed to be here. As she approached Nikki's room, the static became unbearable. It wasn't just in her ears now. It was in the very air around her, vibrating through the walls, making the room feel unstable, as if reality itself was warping. The door to Nikki's room was slightly ajar, the soft light from inside spilling into the hallway. Maya pushed it open, heart racing. The room was empty. The bed was made. The desk was neat. There was no sign of Nikki, except for the radio. It sat on the desk, just as she had left it earlier that week. The same radio that had brought her brother's voice back to her. The same radio that had been silently calling to her. But now it seemed different, darker somehow. The static had changed. It was sharper, more distorted. It filled the room, louder than it had ever been before, as though it were coming from all directions, as if the walls themselves were screaming. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer to the desk, drawn to the radio. The room felt colder now. Too cold. A chill swept through her, making her shiver. And then the radio clicked on. The static screeched, a violent burst of noise that nearly sent Maya stumbling back. But she couldn't pull herself away. Not now. Not when it was so close. The radio's hum reverberated in her chest, the sound filling the room with energy that felt almost alive. And then, through the noise, came a voice she recognized. Maya, come closer. Her heart stopped. The words came from the radio, but they were not distorted, not garbled. They were clear, Liam's voice unmistakable, but there was something wrong about it. Something strained and desperate. Maya, you have to listen. The words seemed to pull at something deep inside her, something buried in the darkest part of her heart. She had heard that voice before. She had heard it in the static, in the whispers, but never like this. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a call from beyond the veil. No, Maya whispered, her voice trembling. This isn't real. This isn't him. The voice continued, undeterred. I'm here, Maya. Please come to me. The room seemed to tilt, the walls warping as though the very foundation of the space was coming undone. The static was no longer just sound. It felt like a presence. Something was reaching through, stretching out the radio, crawling out the cracks in the walls. Maya's eyes darted to the corner of the room. The shadows there seemed to grow deeper, more substantial. She saw movement, just a flicker, too quick to make sense of, but it was enough to make her step back. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, as if something was pressing in from all sides. She heard Nikki's voice now, weak, faint, as if she were far away. Maya, help me. Her body jerked as if jolted by an electric shock. The static crackled, louder now, louder than it had ever been. And for a moment, it felt like the room itself was alive, the walls pulsing with the rhythm of the noise. The voices, Nikki's, Liam's, the others, began to overlap, each one screaming, pleading, whispering in desperation. She pressed her hands to her ears, trying to drown out the noise, but it was everywhere. The walls, the air, her thoughts. The static was taking over. It was consuming everything. A crackling voice broke through the chaos. Maya, they're already here. Her breath caught in her throat. They? Who were they? And then, through the static, a soft whisper came, just loud enough for her to hear. We're inside. The walls seemed to close in on her, the voices growing louder, more urgent. Something was in the walls. Something not human. Something that had crossed through with the static. Panic flooded her veins. She turned and fled, running toward the door. But as she reached the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, the wood warped, the metal locked as though it were part of the very fabric of the room. She pulled and tugged, her heart hammering in her chest. Then, through the chaos, she heard a final whisper. "It's too late, Maya. The door is open." And then nothing. The air felt thick and suffocating as Maya stood in the silence of Nikki's dorm room. Her hands trembled, still hovering over the radio, which now seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural rhythm. The stillness was broken only by the soft hum, no longer a hiss, but a low, menacing thrum that resonated deep in her chest. For a moment, she thought the worst was over. She had heard Liam's voice again. He had warned her. He had told her to stop before it was too late. But something inside her resisted. "It's too late," she told herself. Too late to turn back now. The radio's face stared at her, cracked and aged, its dial seeming to twist its own accord. Her fingers brushed it once more, as if she was somehow compelled to understand it, to make it work. She had to make sense of this. Before she could touch it, the voice came again. This time, it was not Liam. It was deeper, more guttural, and laced with an unmistakable malice. "Maya," you opened the door. She froze. The static rippled, warping into something darker, as if the room itself was beginning to breathe. The walls, the very air around her, felt oppressive. Maya's breath quickened. She glanced around, but the room remained still, too still. It was as if time itself had stopped, and only the radio and the static existed in this suspended moment. You open the door, and now there is no leaving. Her fingers tingled with the lingering energy of the radio, as if it had marked her in some way. The sound of the voices, no, not voices, whispers, swirled around her, distant but near, like the walls themselves were speaking. The murmurs grew louder, overlapping, becoming indistinct, as though hundreds of souls would claw at her mind from behind a thin veil of static. Maya could feel it now. Something cold, something alive, pressing against her. The boundary between the world she knew and the world beyond the static was blurring, dissolving with every passing second. Suddenly, a faint glow appeared at the edges of the radio's dial. Faint but undeniable. It was as though the static had solidified into something physical, something that was reaching out from the radio. Maya stepped back, heart pounding, her breath shallow. The door, the threshold, was real. Her grandfather had been right. The frequency was the key. And now it had opened a gateway, a door between worlds. The radio emitted a low hum, and Maya could feel the floor tremble beneath her feet. It was subtle at first, just a gentle vibration, but it quickly became more intense. The walls creaked, as though something was trying to break through. The temperature in the room plummeted, and she could see her breath in the air, thin tendrils of fog curling from her lips. The whispering grew louder. It was no longer just from the walls, but from everywhere. "Come to us, Maya." The words were chilling, echoing from every corner of the room. Her mind reeled as the static warped, tearing at the edges of her consciousness, twisting her perception of what was real. She stumbled backward, knocking into the desk. The radio's dial whined in protest, a screeching noise that filled the room, vibrating through her chest. Maya clutched her head, the pain unbearable as the whispers, now voices, filled her ears. They were all calling to her, each one desperate, pleading. Some were familiar, some were distorted beyond recognition, but they were all calling to her. "Maya, come through." The voice was Liam's. It was unmistakable, but it was different, wrong. His voice was strained thin, as though it had been stretched and warped by the static, by the very thing that had crossed over with her. "No," she whispered, her body trembling as she backed into the corner of the room. I won't go." But the door had already opened. The static had already taken root. And Maya knew, she felt it deep within her, that the threshold between the worlds was no longer a metaphor. It was real. The space between the living and the dead had cracked wide open, and the beings that existed on the other side were reaching for her. She glanced at the window, a desperate need to escape. But the world outside was just as warped. The trees, once firm and solid, were twisting unnaturally, their branches elongating like fingers, clawing at the sky. The moon was too bright, its light seeming to pulse, as though it was alive, watching her. "Maya," the voice came again, closer this time, her brother's voice. But now, it wasn't just coming from the radio. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere. She covered her ears, but it did no good. The voices flooded her mind, drowning her in a flood of disjointed whispers and screams. The walls seemed to be alive, shifting, breathing, closing in on her. And through it all, the radio continued to hum, a steady, persistent noise that was becoming more than just sound. It was a presence. Her pulse raced. The air felt thick, each breath harder to take as the pressure in the room intensified. The floor beneath her began to crack, jagged lines appearing in the wood, pulsing with the rhythm of the static. Maya could feel it now. It was inside her, clawing its way through her skin, invading her thoughts. The door, the frequency, they had opened something, something that had been waiting. Her eyes went wide as a low, rumbling voice emerged from the radio, the words seeping into her mind like poison. "Come to us, Maya. The door is open and you are ours." In that moment, everything shifted. The room warped and twisted, becoming something unrecognizable, a nightmare of jagged shapes and impossible angles. The static filled every crevice of the air, louder now, like a living thing, pulling at her, dragging her into the void. Maya couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The static had taken over, and there was no turning back. She could feel herself slipping, falling into the darkness, her body trembling with the pull of the unknown, of the things that waited on the other side. "You're ours now." And then everything went silent. Maya's breath came in shallow gasps as she stood in the center of Nikki's dorm room, still gripping the door handle, her hands slick with sweat. The static had filled her ears to the point of numbness, its low hum vibrating through her skull, making it impossible to think clearly. But the silence that followed, after the last words, after the last whisper, was worse. It was suffocating, and it stretched across the room, as if the space itself had become larger, emptier, and yet unbearably tight at the same time. The door refused to open. The walls were pressing in around her. She pushed against the wood, but it wouldn't budge. It felt wrong. She turned, her eyes scanning the room in panic. Nikki's empty desk, the bed neatly made, the small pile of books stacked on the floor. All looked so ordinary, so alive. But something about it felt distorted, as if the room was trying to hold on to its form, but was losing the battle. The corners of the room were darker than they should have been, their shadows twisting, writhing like living things. Her heartbeat thudded her ears, drowning out the eerie silence. Then, from the corner of her vision, something moved, just a flicker, a flash of something wrong. She spun toward the corner of the room, breath caught in her throat. There was nothing there. She was alone. The room seemed to breathe. The walls exhaled. The air felt heavy, thick, like the very atmosphere had shifted. Maya's vision blurred, the edges of everything warping, as though her eyes were struggling to focus on a reality that was slipping away from her. The radio, it was sitting there on the desk, the only thing in the room that was real, the only thing still steady, still holding its place in this maddening landscape of shadows and whispers. But the hum from the radio was different now, louder. Its surge crackled, and there was something underneath the noise, something alive, something desperate. The sound seemed to be pulling at her, tugging at her very soul, coaxing her to step closer, to listen once more. Her feet moved of their own accord. The static warped, bending the air as she moved, and the temperature in the room dropped. A chill crept across her skin, icy fingers running up her spine. Maya shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around herself, but it was no use. The cold was seeping into her bones, making her limbs feel numb, heavy. She reached the desk. Her hand hovered over the radio, and for a moment, she hesitated. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it would only pull her deeper, but the pull was too strong, too compelling. She had to know what it wanted. She had to know who, or what, was speaking to her from the static. With trembling fingers, she turned the dial. For a moment, everything went quiet, too quiet. The oppressive stillness was deafening, and she held her breath, waiting for something, anything to break it. Then the voice came. Maya, her stomach lurched. It was Liam, but not the way he had been before, not the boyish, teasing voice she remembered. This voice was different, deeper. The static clung to it, twisting it until it sounded like it came from somewhere far, far away, from another world. Maya, come to me. Her breath hitched. She felt her pulse quicken. He was calling to her. He was asking her to come to him. But it was not the voice she remembered. It was distorted, wrong. The static had altered him. It had altered everything. She could feel it in her gut, in the very air around her. She didn't want to do it. She couldn't do it. But her hands, her fingers, they needed to turn the dial to keep listening. The static, the whispers, they were all around her, inside her. There was no escape. Maya, the voice was louder now, clearer. But it wasn't Liam's voice anymore. It had become something else. Something ancient. Something that had always been there, hidden in the static, in the cracks between worlds. You opened the door. The words crashed through her like a wave. The air thickened, pressing in on her chest. She couldn't breathe. The voice, whatever it was, sounded like it was coming from inside her own head now. It wasn't just speaking to her anymore. It was speaking through her, pulling her apart from inside. The radio screeched, the hum now deafening, rising to a crescendo that rattled her teeth. Maya's mind felt like it was cracking, splintering under pressure. She felt dizzy, her vision blurring as her knees buckled beneath her. She reached out, clutching the desk to steady herself. Come to us, Maya. Come through. The room tilted, the walls twisting as though they were being stretched. The floor beneath her felt like it was made of sand, sinking with each breath, each heartbeat. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor, her hands desperately reaching for something to hold on to. But the room was shifting. The shadows grew darker, deeper, until they seemed to swallow everything whole. The radio let out one final screech. Then, the world went silent. The air in the room froze, the cold gnawing at her skin. Maya lay there, trembling, unable to move, unable to breathe. She could still hear it. The static, low and insistent, creeping into her thoughts, filling her ears and pulling her down, deeper, deeper. Something was coming. Something had come. The walls seemed to breathe again, louder now, as though they had been waiting for her. A low, rumbling voice echoed from somewhere deep within the room. Not from the radio, not from the walls, but from everywhere. You're ours now, Maya. Her head spun. The room had collapsed around her. No longer the dorm room she had known. It had become a twisted version of itself, shifting, dark, and warped. The walls had grown faces. The ceiling twisted like a blackened sky, every crack leaking static, every surface alive with a hum. And through it all, Maya could feel herself being pulled. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't escape. The door was gone now. The walls had sealed her in. She was trapped in this nightmare. The static roared, louder than ever before. And then, with the crushing weight of inevitability, it dragged her under. Maya's mind felt like it was splintering. Every inch of her body ached with the weight of the unseen force pulling at her, dragging her deeper into the void. The static buzz, a constant, insidious hum that vibrated through her bones. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was presence. It was power. It filled the room, pressed against her skin, seeped into her very thoughts, becoming part of her, just as it had become part of the walls, the air, and the shadows. She tried to scream, but her voice didn't come. There was no air to breathe, no space to move. The world around her twisted, folding into itself, and her body felt weightless, as though she were floating in some dark, suffocating space where time no longer existed. The room, the dorm, was gone. It had been swallowed up, consumed by the static. There was no floor beneath her feet, no ceiling above her head. There was only blackness, a vast, endless expanse filled with the crackling sound of radio, the whispers, and the distant cries of voices she couldn't place. And then she saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a flash in the distance. But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized what it was. A doorway, not a door in traditional sense, but a portal, an aperture that stretched open into an abyss of flickering static. It pulsed like a beating heart, emitting a cold, violet light that swirled with shadows. Through it, Maya could see things. Shadows moved inside it, twisting and contorting into shapes that didn't belong. They weren't human. They weren't even close. Some were vast, dark shapes, like enormous, roiling clouds, their forms flickering like broken signals. Others were smaller, hunched, twisted, creatures of nightmares, their eyes glowing with hunger. Some didn't have eyes at all. The voices called to her again. Maya. It was Liam's voice, but it wasn't the soft, comforting tone she remembered. It was hollow, cracked, like a distant echo from a place she could no longer reach. And it was only one of many. Maya come through. The voices overlapped now, their whispers blending into one constant hum. They weren't just calling from the radio anymore. They were coming from everywhere, from the very walls of the void, from the shadows that stretched endlessly before her, from the creatures that watched her, unseen but felt, as they waited for her to step forward. A chilling realization washed over her. This wasn't just about her brother. This wasn't just about the voices she had heard. This was something far worse. The static had opened a door that had been locked for so long, and now it was wide open. It was a passage to something ancient, something dark, something that had always existed beyond a veiled reality. And now it was here. The static, the hum, the voices, the shifting shadows. They were all tied to the portal. They were not separate. They were connected. Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Fear and panic flooded her mind, but there was nowhere to run. There was no escape from this place. Her breath was ragged as she tried to force herself to move, to step back, but the more she tried, the heavier the air became. The weight of the darkness pressed on her chest, squeezing the life out of her. She wasn't alone. The shadows from the portal began to stretch, reaching toward her. Some of them were small, clawed hands, twisted faces with gaping mouths. Others were larger, crawling like smoke, distorting the very fabric of reality as they moved toward her. The static began to distort. It became louder, sharper, like 1,000 voices screaming in unison. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, It felt like the darkness itself was swallowing her up, consuming her thoughts. Maya, Liam's voice again, but it was different now. Not soft, not pleading. Cold, desperate. You shouldn't have opened it. You shouldn't have come here. The words felt like a warning, a last plea from a world that had already been consumed. Maya's mind raced. Try and comprehend what had gone wrong. She had thought the radio, the static, the whispers, it was all just a puzzle to solve, a mystery to unravel. But the truth was far worse than she had imagined. She had opened the door, and now, something was coming through. Something was already here. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run, to escape, to tear herself away from the horror that was unfolding before her. But the static, no, the portal, was already claiming her. Her limbs were frozen, as though some unseen force had shackled her in place. And then, with an overwhelming pull, she was forced toward it. The shadows loomed larger, their forms growing more defined, more terrifying with every second. A mass of darkness reached out with thin, skeletal hands, its face a blur of shifting shapes and broken static. The portal had opened the door to something that existed outside of time, something that was not meant to be seen. Her vision swirled, and for a moment, the room around her flickered. She saw Nikki's face, her eyes wide in fear. But it wasn't real. It was a vision, a moment in time, frozen but fleeting. It shattered like glass. Maya's body moved against her will, drawn toward the portal. She felt the coldness of it seep into her bones, the suffocating void that threatened to swallow her whole. The whispers were louder now, no longer muffled or distant. They were inside her, tugging at her mind, speaking of forgotten things, of ancient worlds, of horrors beyond comprehension. A shape emerged from the portal, its presence so overwhelming that Maya gasped. It was enormous, its form an impossible collection of shifting shapes, an amalgamation of nightmare and static, a being that could not exist in the realm of the living. Its eyes, if they can be called eyes, were swirling endless pools of darkness, watching her, seeing through her. The creature's voice boomed, reverberating in her mind. Come through, Maya. You have opened the threshold. You belong to us now. The words were final. There was no turning back. The static had taken her. The door had opened, and there was no way to close it. And then, just as Maya's began to crumble under the weight of the creature's gaze, she felt it, a sudden shock of energy, a sharp crack of light, like lightning splitting the air. It was a radio. The radio had to be the key. The hum had shifted again, now sounding almost familiar. The same frequency that had first pulled her into this nightmare. She reached out with every ounce of strength she had left, her fingers trembling as they touched the static-filled air around her. And with a final, desperate push, she did the one thing she had avoided all along. She tuned the dial. Maya's fingers trembled as they reached for the radio dial. The static howled around her, filling her ears with chorus of voices, each more distorted and panicked than the last. The cold had become unbearable now, seeping into her very soul, threatening to pull her apart. She didn't have much time. The portal loomed ahead of her, pulsating, its violet light washing over everything, casting shadows that twisted and contorted in ways that defied logic. The creature's eyes, those endless, black pools of darkness, were still watching her, waiting for her to make a choice. And then the whispers returned, louder than ever. Maya, come to us. You have no choice. The voice sent a cold shiver down her spine. It wasn't Liam's anymore. It wasn't anyone she recognized. It was something else. Something ancient. Something hungry. The static had merged with the dark energy from Portal, twisting everything into a single, all-consuming presence. She couldn't think. She couldn't focus. But one thing remained clear in her mind. She had to stop this. She had to fight back. She had to close the door. But how? The radio was her only chance. She knew it. The frequency. The one that first pulled her into this nightmare. The one that had echoed with her brother's voice was the key. The static wasn't just a sound. It was a door. It was a gateway. If she could find the right frequency, she could shut it all down. She could close the threshold. With a gasp, Maya shoved her hand toward the radio, her fingers locking around the dial. She twisted it, desperation in every movement, praying that the frequency would shift, that the static would break, that the voices would stop. And then the world shuddered. For a moment, everything went still. The static stopped. The whispers stopped. The portal flickered. Just a blip, a brief moment of silence before everything descended into chaos again. The radio screeched. The walls trembled. The ground beneath her feet cracked and groaned, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The shadows around her lengthened, their forms now reaching toward her, eager, angry, hungry. The portal surged, a violent pulse of dark energy flooding the room. It was like the very air was being sucked into it, drawn into void that had opened between the worlds. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as the radio howled. The frequency spiraling out of control. The static was no longer a simple hum or hiss. It was a cacophony, a storm of sound so loud that her ears rang. Her head pounded. She tried to turn the dial, but it wouldn't stop. The frequency was warping, shifting, spiraling deeper into something darker, something more malevolent. And then, crack, a flash of light erupted from the radio. The room split open like an egg, a jagged tear in the air. The shadows spilled out in torrents, pouring from the portal and surging toward her, twisting and coiling around her body like living tendrils. They wrapped around her legs, her arms, pulling her toward the center of the room. The creature's voice, louder now, filled the air. You shouldn't have interfered, Maya. You opened the threshold. There is no going back. The radio screeched again, louder than ever, the sound vibrating through her body like a physical blow. It was as if the static had a life of its own now, a life that wanted her to fall deeper into the void. But Maya didn't stop. She couldn't. She twisted the dial harder, her fingers bloody from the sharp, jagged edges. Her breath came in gasps, each one more strained than the last. She could feel herself being torn between two realities, the one she had known and the dark one that had spilled through the portal. The static surged around her, a wave of energy, pulling her down, swallowing her whole. And then, just as she thought she couldn't take any more, the world exploded into light. It was blinding, more brilliant than anything Maya had ever seen. The static ripped through her, slicing through her mind, but the light burned away, cutting through the shadows, cutting through the cold. The creatures shrieked, the sound of their torment filling her ears, but Maya couldn't stop. She couldn't hear anything anymore. The radio's howl grew louder, piercing, as though it was splitting the very fabric of space apart. And then, with a final twist of dial, everything stopped. The world fell into silence. For a few moments, Maya didn't move. The darkness that surrounded her, the portal, the creatures, all of it was gone. The shadows were gone. The hum of the static was gone. The cold, the suffocating pressure. It was all gone. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The silence was almost more terrifying than the chaos. It was as though everything that had happened, everything she had experienced, had never really existed. It felt unreal, like a dream. But then, a whisper broke through the silence. It was her brother's voice. Maya, her heart skipped a beat. She whipped around, desperate to find him. But there was nothing, no sign of the portal, no creatures, no shadows. It was as if the world had gone back to normal, but the static remained. It was still in the air, still lingering like a presence. It was quieter now, but it wasn't gone. It had left a mark on her, a lingering thread that was always there. Maya could feel it, deep in her chest, in her mind. The connection had been made. She had opened the door, and while she had closed it for now, she knew the threshold was still there. Somewhere beyond the veil, the voice called to her again, softer this time, a flicker in the distance. "Maya, come back to us." The radio, now silent, sat on the desk in the corner of the room. Maya could feel its presence, feel the pull of the static, drawing her in. She knew she could never truly escape it. The static, the voices, the portal, they were a part of her now. And no matter how far she ran, no matter how much she tried to forget, the static would always be there, whispering to her from the darkness. It had taken everything, and it would never let her go. Maya stared at the radio, her body frozen in place. It sat innocently on the desk, the dial untouched, the static gone, but the air around it felt alive. It hummed with an energy she couldn't explain, an unseen weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. For hours, she had sat there in Nikki's dorm room, the silence suffocating, wondering if it had all been a dream, if somehow, in the haze of terror and exhaustion, she had imagined the portal, the creatures, the whispers. But deep down, she knew the truth. It had been real. The static still lingered in the air, thick and electric, almost as if it had become part of her. Maya rubbed her temple, the faint echo of Liam's voice still playing in her mind. His final words, soft but insistent, calling her back to the void. "Maya, you can never leave us." She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. No, it wasn't real. She had closed the door. She had turned the dial. The threshold had been sealed. But that didn't stop the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach, the sense that something was wrong. Maya stood, her legs unsteady beneath her. She didn't want to look at the radio, but she couldn't help herself. It felt like it was watching her, waiting for her to make another move, waiting for her to listen again. The door to the room creaked open behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun, expected to see Nikki standing there, but no one was there. The door was still ajar, the hallway outside dark and empty. And yet, something was there. The space between the door and the wall seemed stretched, as though it had been torn open. The air shimmered with something unnatural, a ripple that shouldn't have been. She stepped forward cautiously, her feet dragging across the floor. The static buzzed faintly, like a whisper at the back of her mind, a persistent hum that grew louder with every step. The hallway felt longer than it should. The lights flickered above her, casting erratic shadows against the walls. The room she had been in, Nikki's dorm, seemed distant now, as if the entire building had shifted. The walls had grown higher, wider, and the corners seemed to stretch further into darkness. And then she saw it. At the far end of the hallway, in the deepest shadows, a shape was moving. It was too tall, too thin, a mass of shifting blackness, the kind that made her stomach turn. She couldn't make out its features, but she could feel its presence, pressing it on her from all sides. Its eyes, if they were even eyes, burned through the dark, locked onto hers with an unnatural intensity. Maya took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't normal. This wasn't supposed to be real. But the static was building again, louder now, vibrating in her chest. The walls groaned with an otherworldly force, as if the very foundation of the building was shaking under the weight of what she had done. A low, guttural whisper emanated from the darkness. "You shouldn't have closed it." The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was Liam, but it was wrong, twisted, corrupted. Before she could react, the shadow moved. It was fast, far too fast for something that should have been made of darkness. In a blink, it was right in front of her, its form now clearer, if only by the faint, flickering light. The shadow was no longer just a figure. It was a thing, a terrible thing, with long, clawed hands, its body distorted and contorted as if it didn't fit the world around it. She gasped, stumbling back, but the thing reached out, its hand like a web of writhing tendrils, snaking toward her. She felt its coldness, its presence filling every inch of her body. Try to pull her into the void it had come from, and then the radio in the room crackled to life. Maya, the voice, Liam's voice, flooded her mind, and in that moment, she knew. She knew that the portal hadn't been fully closed. The static hadn't been sealed. The door had merely been a threshold, and now it was splintering. The fabric between the living world and the realm beyond had grown thin, too thin. Maya's body shook as the figure loomed over her, its mouth opening wide, revealing a gaping blackness that seemed to swallow all light. She could hear the whispers of those trapped beyond the static, whispers that clawed at her mind, pulling at her sanity. The shadow didn't speak now. It didn't need to. It reached out to her, its tendrils twisting like serpents, and Maya could feel herself being dragged toward it, her feet unable to move, her body frozen in fear. In a panic, her hand shot toward the radio again, but the static wasn't just in her ears anymore. It was in her soul. It was the air she breathed, the ground beneath her feet. It filled every inch of the world, overwhelming her senses. You opened the door, Maya. Now you must come through. She could hear the hunger in its voice. It was a voice she knew, had always known. Liam, her brother, but it was twisted, warped by the darkness of the void. Maya's fingers found a radio dial once more, but the room around her was unraveling. The walls were bending and folding, shifting like paper in a fire. The air around her crackled with the energy of something ancient, something beyond comprehension. And then, as she turned the dial, a flash of light exploded from the radio. The force of it pushed her back, slamming her into the wall. The light was blinding, but it didn't hurt. It pulled at her like gravity itself was warping. The shadows screamed, their forms writhing and distorting the light, as though they couldn't exist in its presence. The radio's hum grew louder, its frequency shifting with an agonizing pitch. And then everything stopped. The lights went out. The hallway was empty. The shadow was gone. The whispers were silenced, but the static remained. It was inside her now. It would never leave, no matter how far she ran, no matter how much she tried to escape. The static would always be there, lingering just beneath the surface. The boundary between the living world and the realm beyond had been shattered. The door would never be fully closed. The radio was silent, but its presence lingered, pulling at her mind, reminding her the choice she had made. The door had been opened, and once it had been opened, there was no going back. The threshold was no longer just a place. It was a part of her now, and the darkness would always be waiting. The silence was almost unbearable. Maya hadn't been able to leave Nikki's dorm room since the night everything changed. Days had passed, but the world outside seemed a distant memory, faded and distorted, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. She hadn't spoken to anyone since that night. There was nothing to say,